The hall was not meant to exist. It sat beneath the city like a secret organ, pulsing with whispers instead of blood. The door was carved with no name, only a symbol, an open eye crossed by a blade. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of candle wax and dust, as if time itself had refused to enter. When the figure stepped onto the low, cracked stage, no one breathed. He wore black gloves, not for fashion but for distance. Between his fingers rested a single book, its cover unmarked, its pages uneven and yellow, like something torn from a grave. He didn't look at the audience at first. He listened, to fear, to curiosity, to the tremor in every human heartbeat that wanted forbidden knowledge. Then he spoke. "Tonight," he said softly, "you will learn what every empire fears. The rules that made kings kneel, lovers betray, and the innocent crawl toward power." The room leaned closer. His voice had the calm of someone who had seen the world from behind its mask and found the truth unbearable. "This lecture," he continued, "was banned in Florence, burned in Rome, and whispered about in the corridors of every palace that ever feared its people. I am not your teacher. I am your confessor, and what I will reveal cannot be forgotten." A woman in the front row whispered, "Who wrote it?" He smiled without warmth. "A man who died for his honesty, Machiavelli. But not the Machiavelli they let you read. His true words were cut apart, softened, buried. I found the unedited version, the one that teaches not how to serve power, but how to steal it." He opened the book, and the candles flickered as if protesting. "These are the 21 ruthless laws," he said, "written for those who no longer wish to be prey." A silence spread, slow and heavy. Somewhere in the dark, a clock ticked once and stopped. "Every law," he warned, "will demand something from you, your comfort, your mercy, perhaps your soul. But remember this, ignorance is obedience, knowledge is treason." The audience sat frozen, faces pale in the trembling candlelight. He turned the first page. The ink looked wet, though centuries had passed. "Let us begin," he whispered, "with the first and most merciful deception." And as his gloved hand traced the words, the hall seemed to breathe, alive, watching, ready to reveal the smile that lies. He looked up, eyes gleaming like reflections in dark glass. "This," he said, "is Law 1. The smile that lies." The audience shifted, uneasy. Someone coughed, someone else laughed too quickly, pretending bravery. The teacher ignored them. He began to walk between the rows of seats, his footsteps soft, deliberate. "Every empire," he whispered, "was built by men who smiled as they sharpened their knives. Power does not arrive with thunder. It enters the room wearing kindness." He paused beside a young man in the second row. "Do you know what makes a lie perfect?" he asked. The man shook his head. "It must look like mercy." The lights flickered as he spoke of Adrian Valenti, a politician once beloved by all. Adrian smiled at beggars, kissed children, remembered names, yet behind every gesture lay calculation. He learned that sincerity is only a costume that fools crave to see. Adrian began his rise during a crisis, a famine that stripped the city's faith from its rulers. He offered hope, not food, promises, not solutions. "People don't need truth," the lecturer murmured. "They need comfort. Feed them that, and they will crown you." The story grew darker. Adrian's allies soon became liabilities, his mentors obstacles. One by one he praised them publicly and destroyed them privately. Each downfall was preceded by a handshake and that same gentle smile. "Why?" a voice from the back asked, trembling. "Why betray those who trusted him?" The lecturer turned slowly. "Because trust is the easiest leash. When they believe you care, they stop watching your hands." He returned to the stage. Machiavelli wrote of this, that affection is the most dangerous illusion. To be loved is to be exposed. To be feared politely is to rule without blood. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. Remember this. Deception doesn't always wear darkness. Sometimes it wears grace, laughter, and warm eyes. The predator that smiles is the one that feeds longest. The woman from the front row whispered again, "So no one can be trusted?" He smiled for the first time, and it was worse than a threat. "You misunderstand. You can trust, but only those who need you more than they can afford to deceive you." Silence swallowed the hall. The candlelight painted the crowd in trembling gold, like souls uncertain whether they were being saved or condemned. The lecturer closed the book halfway. Adrian's story ended the night he realized the lie had mastered him. He no longer smiled to deceive others. He smiled to hide his emptiness. A hush fell so deep it bordered on prayer. The teacher's voice sank into a whisper. "Power begins not in conquest," he said, "but in invisibility. To command the world, you must first vanish from it." The lecturer's shadow lengthened across the cracked wall as he turned the next page. The candles hissed softly, releasing thin threads of smoke that curled like whispers into the stale air. His voice, when it came again, was quieter, measured, like a man revealing something he once swore to keep hidden. Law 2. Power is most absolute when it cannot be seen. He stepped down from the stage, the sound of his shoes faint against the stone. "You saw Adrian smile and rise," he said, "but you never saw the hands that placed him there. That," he added, "is the art of invisible power." The audience leaned in. The air had changed, colder now, as if something unseen had joined them. "There was a woman once," he began, "named Lucia Serrano. You won't find her in any book. She never signed her name to anything, never stood in the light, yet every decision in her government passed through her silence. Lucia was not beautiful, nor charismatic. She didn't seduce with words or warmth. She ruled by absence. Her strategy was simple. Never lead the conversation. Control the one who does. Through intermediaries, she fed information to ministers, whispered false fears into the ears of rivals, and always, always, made others believe the ideas were their own. Within 2 years, the Prime Minister trusted her more than his conscience. Within 4, he could not decide without her approval. She understood, the lecturer said softly, that visibility is vulnerability. The moment they see you, they can destroy you. But when you exist as an idea, untouchable, unseen, you become immortal. He stopped walking, standing directly beneath a flickering light. Machiavelli called it the shadow's throne. It is the seat behind every ruler's chair, the place no crown can reach. Someone in the audience whispered, "But what if they discover the shadow?" He smiled faintly. "Then you vanish, and let their guilt do the work." He opened the book again, revealing faint, handwritten margins. Law 3. Disappear to multiply your worth. Law 4. The one who defines truth controls reality. Lucia eventually disappeared completely. No records, no obituary, no trace of her life. But her disappearance only amplified her power. Those she had manipulated began to see her everywhere, in new policies, in sudden dismissals, in the quiet fear that governed their decisions. She had become a ghost, he said. And ghosts, my friends, do not beg for loyalty. They create it through paranoia. The teacher paused, letting the words sink like venom. Then, almost kindly, he added, "Most people mistake attention for influence. They shine, they shout, they demand to be known. But power, true power, does not shout. It listens." He snapped the book shut, the sound echoing through the hall like a gunshot. "Understand this," he said. "To rule unseen, You must first kill the part of yourself that craves recognition. Pride is the chain that binds every would-be ruler to mediocrity. He returned to the stage, eyes lowered, tone hushed to near confession. The next laws, he murmured, concern the poison of morality, the illusion of goodness that weakens kings and blinds prophets. The candles dimmed, shadows stretching toward him like faithful disciples. You think righteousness protects you, he said, a cruel softness in his voice. It only makes your throat easier to cut. The lecturer's voice fell to a near whisper, as if even the walls should not hear what came next. The hall seemed to shrink, drawing the audience closer, trapping them within the weight of his words. Law 5, he read. Morality is the illusion of the powerless. He looked up. You were taught that good men win and evil men fall. But tell me, when did virtue ever feed a starving child or save a kingdom from betrayal? The candles trembled. The teacher walked slowly toward the altar where the first book of Machiavelli had once been condemned and burned. His gloved hand brushed the blackened wood. There was a priest, he began, named Father Dario, a man who preached purity but confessed in whispers that he never believed in sin, only in control. He learned early that guilt was a leash no iron could match. The story unfolded like scripture rewritten in ash. During a plague that ravaged his city, Dario told his flock that survival was a test of faith. But behind the church doors, he sold absolution to the wealthy and condemned the poor as impure. The holier his words became, the more power he gathered. Morality, the lecturer said, is not a compass, it is a currency. Those who claim the moral high ground merely charge others for the climb. He turned a page. Law 6, righteousness blinds the wise. The audience watched him pace, his shadow spilling over the walls like spilled ink. Do you know why good men die young? He asked. Because they hesitate. Because conscience whispers in their ear while the ruthless act. He told of a judge who refused to sign a death warrant for a guilty man. By dawn, the judge's own son was found hanging in the square, a message from those who ruled the city in silence. The next day, the judge signed every decree without reading a single name. The moment you choose to be moral, the teacher said coldly, you offer your throat to the wolves and call it virtue. A woman in the back cried softly. The sound didn't move him. Law 7. Purity is the prettiest disguise for corruption. He spoke of how kings built monuments to piety, while their armies slaughtered innocents behind banners of faith. History, he said, is written not by the good, but by those skilled enough to look good while doing evil. The hall grew suffocating. Every flicker of light seemed like a judgment. The teacher's gaze swept the audience. You must decide, he whispered, whether you want to be holy or remembered. He closed the book, the leather creaking like a sigh. Father Dario died worshipped, he said, and was buried in gold. But his sermons still echo, reminding us that conscience is a luxury of those not hungry for power. He let the silence stretch, then added in a voice barely human, and when conscience fails, what remains? Betrayal.
The flame of the last candle shivered, its light clinging desperately to the air before surrendering into darkness. The hall became a breathing shadow. The lecturer's voice emerged from it, calm, steady, and intimate, as if speaking directly into the listener's mind. Law 8. Loyalty is a contract signed in fear. He placed the open book upon the altar. You think betrayal is born from hatred, he said, but you are wrong. Betrayal begins with trust, and trust begins with need. The audience leaned closer, faces half lit by the faint glow of dying wicks. There was once a man named Adrian, the lecturer continued, the same name that had appeared in the earlier lesson. Once he was a symbol of loyalty. He served his friend and leader, Duke Rinaldi, with devotion that bordered on worship. They had built an empire together, one through blood, the other through strategy. Adrian had vowed to never turn against the Duke. Yet promises, like candles, burn bright only until the air thins. When the Duke began to distrust his advisors, he ordered silent executions. Paranoia bred in every corridor. Adrian watched men he'd trained vanish overnight. He realized then that loyalty was not protection. It was a waiting grave. Betrayal, the lecturer said softly, is not a decision. It is an awakening. He described the night Adrian entered the Duke's chamber, trembling. The Duke smiled at him, the same gentle smile from earlier lessons, and said, "You're the only man I trust." The words felt like a curse. Adrian understood at that moment that the one who is trusted most is always the next to die. So before dawn, he made his move. With a forged letter, he convinced the army that Rinaldi had sold them to the enemy. By sunrise, the Duke's fortress was under siege, not by strangers, but by his own men. Law 9. The betrayer survives only by becoming the betrayal itself. The lecturer's tone grew heavier. After the Duke's fall, Adrian was crowned chancellor. Yet he could not sleep. He saw the Duke's shadow in every corner, heard his voice in every silence. Betrayal had freed him from death, but chained him to guilt. He had become what he destroyed, a man who trusted no one. The hall grew still. A man in the crowd whispered, "So he paid the price?" The teacher nodded. "Every traitor does." For betrayal is not punished by men, but by memory. He turned the page slowly, revealing the final law of the triad. Law 10. Every betrayal begins as self-preservation and ends as self-destruction. Lucia, the unseen hand from the earlier chapter, returned to the story here. She had orchestrated the Duke's downfall from the shadows, using Adrian as her blade. He never realized she was the one who fed him the rumor that began the coup. When Adrian finally discovered the truth, the teacher said, he laughed. Not in anger, but in recognition. He saw himself in Lucia. He had only completed the circle. The same deceit that birthed him had devoured him. Adrian vanished soon after. Some said he fled. Others whispered that Lucia ensured his silence. But in the end, it didn't matter. Both of them had already been erased by their own design. Ghosts in a war for invisible crowns. The lecturer closed the book for a moment and stared into the void above the audience. His tone softened, almost sorrowful. "Betrayal," he murmured, "is not the fall of loyalty. It is its final, inevitable evolution. When love and fear grow equal, the knife always finds the heart." A long pause followed. The students shifted, some unwilling to meet his gaze. Then, in a voice that almost trembled, he said, "To rule men, you must understand their fear. To own them, you must become it." The candles hissed back to life, as if obeying his words. "And so we arrive," he said, opening to the next page, "at laws 11 through 14, the mirror of fear."
The lecturer stood perfectly still as the last echo of his words faded. The audience waited, breathless, as though the silence itself was part of the ritual. Then, without warning, he struck a match. Its flame clawed upward, casting a sharp, trembling light across his face. "Law 11, he began. "Fear is the architect of obedience." He held the flame before him. When Adrian fell, his empire didn't die. It merely changed hands. The soldiers who once served loyalty now served terror. Fear rebuilt what trust had destroyed. He blew out the match. Darkness swallowed them again. "There was a woman," he continued, "a queen who ruled a dying kingdom. Her name was Celeste. Her people loved her once, until famine came, and with it, doubt. She knew love could not hold a starving crowd together, so she turned to fear." The teacher's tone shifted, low and intimate. "Each night, Celeste walked her palace barefoot, whispering to herself that kindness had made her weak. At dawn, she summoned her council and executed the kindest among them. By the week's end, no one spoke her name without trembling. He turned the page. Law 12, fear does not demand loyalty, it manufactures it. Under Celeste's reign, he said, obedience became survival. Mothers taught their children silence before prayer. The people hated her, but they obeyed her. And to a ruler, hatred without rebellion is the purest form of control. He stepped closer to the crowd, his gloved hands clasped behind his back. Machiavelli understood this. He wrote that fear, unlike love, does not change when fortunes fade. It endures, it multiplies, and it speaks when all else falls silent. The audience sat frozen. Even the candles seemed afraid to move. Law 13. Fear reveals the truth of all relationships. He smiled faintly. You only know someone when they fear losing you. Lovers, servants, friends. Watch what they protect when panic touches them. Their fear will show you their heart. He paused, then whispered, and their price. The final law of the chapter bled across the next page in a darker ink. Law 14. Whoever controls fear, controls reality. Celeste understood this too well, the lecturer said. She created ghosts in her palace, rumors of a curse, shadows of the dead, voices in the corridors. Her people stopped fearing hunger and began fearing her. That, he said, was her victory and her ruin. The queen eventually died alone, surrounded by gold but unable to sleep in its light. Fear, once her servant, had become her reflection. The lecturer lowered his head, voice trembling like a confession. Fear never leaves its creator. It only changes mirrors. He turned the next page, his gloves brushing against the paper like whispers. And when fear fades, he murmured, something colder takes its place. Guilt. The hall darkened once more. The lecturer's hand hovered over the page, as if reluctant to touch it. Fear binds the body, he said softly. But guilt enslaves the soul. The audience shifted uneasily. Some crossed their arms, others stared at the floor. The air had grown thick, heavy with an emotion no one wanted to name. Law 15. Guilt is the most profitable emotion ever created. He began to pace again, each step echoing like a confession. When Celeste's kingdom fell, her priests did not die. They adapted. They told the starving masses that their suffering was divine punishment, that their misery was proof of sin. And so the people begged forgiveness instead of justice. The candles burned low, their light now a dull amber. That, he whispered, is the brilliance of guilt. It convinces the victim to punish themselves. He turned the next page. Law 16. Those who carry guilt will never rebel. There was a pause, then a story. A governor once ruled a city through mercy. He pardoned thieves, forgave debts, healed the sick. But when his people began to love him, he grew afraid. So he confessed to crimes he hadn't committed, told them he was unworthy of their faith. They wept for him, defended him, worshipped his shame, and thus he ruled them again. The teacher smiled, not in mockery but in awe. You see, guilt feeds power twice, first by weakening the guilty, then by sanctifying the manipulator. A flicker of red light passed over his face as a candle died. And that, he said, voice dropping lower, brings us to the final law. He tapped the parchment with one black-gloved finger. Law 17. The purest form of control is forgiveness withheld. Forgiveness, he said, is a throne built on suffering. To forgive is to release, but to almost forgive, to dangle mercy just out of reach, that is divine authority. He stepped back toward the altar, eyes reflecting the trembling flames. The rulers of guilt never shout, never threaten. They whisper, "You are forgiven." But not yet. And in that waiting, The world bows. He closed the book gently. But guilt, he murmured, is only half the trap. When love enters the equation, it ceases to be control. It becomes addiction. The candles flared as if gasping for air. The candlelight trembled as if the air itself grew nervous. The lecturer leaned closer, his voice lower, smoother now, no longer instructing, but seducing. Power, he began, is not taken by force. It is invited. The greatest tyrants do not conquer people's bodies, they enchant their hearts. He flipped the ancient page. Law 18. Desire is more obedient than fear. Fear, he said, pacing like a serpent circling its prey, creates distance. It builds walls. But desire opens the gates willingly. He told the story of Lord Armand, a ruler who understood this perfectly. Armand never issued decrees. He promised dreams. He told his subjects they were chosen, that his success was their glory. He looked into their eyes and made them feel seen, necessary, special. And when they finally belonged to him, he tightened his hand so gently that they thanked him for the chains. The lecturer smiled darkly. That is the seduction of power. It doesn't demand loyalty. It makes loyalty feel beautiful. He turned the page again. Law 19. Love is the perfect disguise for control. The words seemed to whisper by themselves. Those who rule through affection, he continued, wear the sweetest masks. They give just enough warmth to create dependence, just enough kindness to breed obsession. And once the heart is captured, the mind will always follow. He gestured toward the audience. You've seen it, haven't you? The lover who knows exactly when to withdraw, the mentor who praises you just before a demand, the leader who smiles while taking everything you have. A student's hand trembled in the dark. The teacher's eyes locked on him. You think you're immune, he said softly. But the moment you need to be understood, you're already conquered. He told one last story, voice almost tender. There was once a queen who ruled a nation not with armies but with letters. Every night she wrote to her enemies, letters filled with admiration, sympathy, shared pain. And when their guards were down, when they believed she loved them, she took their crowns, not through cruelty but through trust. That is how the world is seduced. He closed the book halfway, as though unwilling to continue. And that, he said, is the cruelest revelation of all. Power does not look like violence. It looks like affection. The silence that followed was unbearable. Only the faint sound of rain could be heard beyond the chamber walls, like quiet applause for the devil. Then he added, almost a whisper, and yet, what happens when the seducer falls in love? When the manipulator begins to care? The flame nearest him flickered blue, casting a strange light over his face. He exhaled slowly. That, he said, is where all power begins to rot. The room was darker now. Only one candle remained, its flame bending under a silent draft. The lecturer's tone had changed, no longer confident but burdened, as though every word cost him something. Law 20, he whispered. The final move. The moment when every mask must either fall or fuse with your face forever. He looked around the silent hall. All games of power, he said, end the same way. Someone must become what they pretended to be. The manipulator becomes the tyrant. The victim becomes the monster. No one escapes unchanged. He told of a man named Silvio, Machiavelli's last student, brilliant, cunning, patient. Silvio studied every law, practiced every deception. He rose through courts and councils until even kings sought his advice. But in mastering the dance of deceit, he forgot where the performance ended. He smiled too perfectly, plotted too beautifully, and one day realized he had no face beneath the mask. The lecturer paused. The sound of the rain deepened, turning into a rhythm, steady, grave, like a heartbeat. Power, he continued, is not lost through weakness. It's lost through completion. Once your final move is made, the game dissolves, and so do you. He lifted the book one last time, running his finger over the ink. Machiavelli wrote that the final move is not to win, but to erase the need to win. When you no longer desire control, when the game has devoured your soul, you stand at the edge of the abyss and realize it has your reflection. The candle sputtered. When a king plays his last move, he said quietly, the board disappears. The flame went out. In the darkness, his voice dropped to a whisper. But what if the final move isn't yours? A faint sound, a slow clap from somewhere unseen. The silence after the clap was heavier than any scream. The lecturer did not move. For a long moment, the audience thought the story was over. But then, from the darkness, his voice returned. Low, hoarse, stripped of its performance. Law 21, he said. The forbidden truth. The one Machiavelli never wrote. Because it cannot be taught without destroying the listener. He struck a match. The light revealed not a teacher anymore, but a man haunted by his own words. His eyes seemed older, distant. All power, he murmured, is borrowed from the weakness of others. Every victory, every triumph, feeds on submission. And when you finally hold absolute control, you discover the most horrifying thing of all. He leaned forward. There's no one left to control. The class shifted uneasily. Shadows pressed against the walls like unseen witnesses. He continued. Machiavelli believed men could be ruled by fear or desire. But he was wrong about one thing. He thought the ruler remained free. In truth, the ruler becomes enslaved. To the game, to the lies, to the hunger that once gave him purpose. A faint laugh escaped him, brittle and bitter. I've met kings who wept when they were alone. Men who destroyed nations just to feel alive for one more night. Lovers who betrayed the only person who ever saw them, just to remind themselves they still had power left to use. He looked at his students, eyes wide, afraid to blink. That is the forbidden truth. Power doesn't corrupt. It reveals. It peels away the layers of civility, the politeness, the excuses. And what remains is who you've always been. A young woman in the front row whispered, Then what's the point of learning all this? He smiled faintly. To know the cost before you pay it. The candlelight caught the curve of his smile, neither kind nor cruel, just tired. The true master of power, he said, is the one who can walk away before it consumes him, the one who sees the game, understands it, but refuses to play. He closed the book slowly. Every empire collapses. Every manipulator grows old. Every secret eventually becomes meaningless. The only real power left, he whispered, is the power to remain human. He looked down at the last page, where a single sentence had been written in trembling ink. Words not by Machiavelli, but perhaps by someone who understood him too well. When you stare too long into control, control begins to stare back. He turned the book toward the audience, revealing that the page was smeared, ink blurred by water or tears. The lecturer stepped back, and for the first time his hands shook. If you've understood everything tonight, he said softly, then you've already lost something you can never recover. The students sat frozen. No one spoke. He looked toward the door, the same door they had entered through hours earlier, but it was now half open, the corridor beyond bathed in red light. Go, he said, before you start asking who's been teaching me. As the last of them rose, his voice followed, calm and distant. Power was never about ruling others. It was always about surviving yourself. The final candle died. In the dark, the chair where he had sat was empty. Only the open book remained, pages fluttering as if breathing, and beneath them, carved faintly into the wooden desk, were 4 words that ended the lecture forever. The lesson is you.